Chapter 2, wherein useful information will be found concerning a library where strange things will shortly come to pass. Desirous of embracing the whole circle of human knowledge and anxious to bequeath to the world a concrete symbol of his encyclopedic genius and a display in keeping with his pecuniary resources, Baron Alexander de Esparvu had formed a library of 360,000 volumes, both printed and in manuscript, whereof the greater part emanated from the Benedictines of Leguig. By a special clause in his will, he enjoined his heirs to add to his library, after his death, whatever they might deem worthy of note in natural, moral, political, philosophical, and religious science. He had indicated the sums which might be drawn from his estate for the fulfillment of this object, and charged his eldest son, Fulgence Adolphe, to proceed with these additions. Fulgence Adolphe accomplished with the filial respect the wishes expressed by his illustrious father. After him, this huge library, which represented more than one child's share of the estate, remained undivided between the senator's 3 sons and 2 daughters, and René de Esparvu, on who devolved the house in the Rue Grancière, became the guardian of the valuable collection. His 2 sisters, Madame Paulette de Saint-Fain and Madame Coussiart, repeatedly demanded that such a large but unremunerative piece of property should be turned into money. But René and Gaëtan bought in the shares of their 2 collegians, and the library was saved. René de Esparvu even busied himself in adding to it, thus fulfilling the intentions of its founder. But from year to year, he lessened the number and importance of the acquisitions, opening that the intellectual output in Europe was on the wane. Nevertheless, Gaëtan enriched it out of his own funds with works published both in France and abroad, which he thought good, and he was not lacking in judgment, though his brothers would never allow that he had a particle. Thanks to this man of a leisurely and inquiring mind, Baron Alexander's collection was kept practically up to date. Even at the present day, the de Esparvu Library in the departments of theology, jurisprudence, and history is one of the finest private libraries in all Europe. Here you may study physical science, or to put it better, physical sciences in all their branches, and for that matter, metaphysics. That is to say, all that is connected with physics and has no other name. So impossible is it to designate by a substantive that which has no substance, and is but a dream and an illusion. Here you might contemplate with admiration philosophers addressing themselves to the solution, and resolution of the absolute, to the determination of the indeterminate, and to the definition of the infinitive. Amid this pile of books and booklets, both sacred and profane, you may find everything down to the latest and most fashionable pragmatism. Other libraries there are more richly abounding in bindings of venerable antiquity and illustrious origin, whose smooth and soft-hued texture rendered them delicious to the touch. Bindings which have the gilder's art has enriched with a gossamer, lacework, foliage, flowers, emblematic devices, and coats of arms. Bindings that charm the studious eye with their tender radiance. Other libraries perhaps harbor a greater array of manuscripts, illuminated with delicate and brilliant miniatures by artists of Venice, Flanders, or Touraine, but in handsome, sound editions of ancient and modern writers, both sacred and profane, the de Esparvu Library is second to none. Here one finds all that has come down to us from antiquity, all the fathers of the church, the apologists and the decretalists, all the humanists of the Renaissance, all the encyclopedists, the whole world of philosophy and science. Therefore, it was that Cardinal Merlin, when he deigned to visit it, remarked, "There is no man whose brain is equal to containing all the knowledge which is piled upon these shelves. Happily, it doesn't matter. Monseigneur Chapman, who worked there often, when a curate in Paris, was in the habit of saying, 'I see here the stuff to make many a Thomas Aquinas and many an Arius, if only the modern mind has not lost its ancient ardor for good and evil.' There was no gainsaying that the manuscripts formed the more valuable portion of this immense collection. Noteworthy indeed was the unpublished correspondence of Gassendi, a Father Mercinet, and a Pascal, which threw a new light on the spirit of the 17th century. Nor must we forget the Hebrew Bible, the Talmuds, the rabbinical treatises, printed and in manuscript, the Aramaic and Samaritan texts on sheepskin and on tablets of sycamore. In fine, all these antique and valuable copies collected in Egypt and in Syria by the celebrated Moïse Dedina and acquired at a small cost by Alexander de Esperville in 1836, when the learned Hebraist died of old age and poverty in Paris. The Espervina Library occupied the whole of the second floor of the old house. The works thought to be of but mediocre interest, such as books of Protestant exegesis of the 19th and 20th centuries, the gift of Monsieur Gaetan, relegated unbound to the limbo of the upper regions, the catalogue with its various supplements ran into no less than 18 folio volumes. It was quite up to date, and the library was in perfect order. Monsieur Julien Sarriette, archivist and paleographer, who, being poor and retiring, used to make his living by teaching, became in 1895 tutor to young Maurice on the recommendation of the Bishop of Acre, and with scarcely an interval found himself curator of the Bibliothèque Espervine, endowed with businesslike energy and dogged patience. Monsieur Sarriette himself classified all the members of this vast body. The system he invented and put into practice was so complicated, the labels he put on the books were made up of so many capital letters and small letters, both Latin and Greek, so many Arabic and Roman numerals, asterisks, double asterisks, triple asterisks, and those signs which in arithmetic express powers and roots, that the mere study of it would have involved more time and labor than would have been required for the complete mastery of algebra. And as no one could be found who would give the hours that might be more profitably employed in discovering the law of numbers to the solving of these cryptic symbols, Monsieur Sarriette remained the only one capable of finding his way among the intricacies of his system, and without his help it had become an utter impossibility to discover, among the 360,000 volumes confided to his care, the particular volume one happened to require. Such was the result of his labors. Far from complaining about it, he experienced, on the contrary, a lively satisfaction. Monsieur Sarriette loved his library. He loved it with a jealous love. He was there every day at 7 o'clock in the morning, busy cataloging at a huge mahogany desk, the slips in his handwriting filled an enormous case. Standing by his side, surmounted by a plaster bust of Alexander de Esperville, Alexander wore his hair brushed straight back and had a sublime look on his face. Like Chateaubriand, he affected little feathery side whiskers. His lips were pursed, his bosom bare, punctually at midday, Monsieur Sariette used to sally forth to lunch at a creamery in the narrow, gloomy Rue de Canet. It was known as the Creamerie de Quatre Évêques, and has once been the haunt of Baudelaire, Theodore de Banville, Charles Asselineau, and a certain grandee of Spain who had translated the mysteries of Paris into the language of the conquistadors, and the ducks that paddled so nicely on the old stone sign which gave its name to the streets used to recognize Monsieur Sariette at 1:45 to the very minute. He went back to his library, where he remained until 7 o'clock. He then again betook himself to Quatre Évêques and sat down to his frugal dinner with its crowning glory of stewed prunes. Every evening after dinner, his crony, Monsieur Guinardon, universally known as Père Guinardon, a scene painter and picture restorer, he used to do work for churches, would come from his garret in the Rue Princesse to have his coffee and liquor at the Quatre Évêques, and the two friends would play their game of dominoes. Old Guinardon, who was, like some rugged old tree, still full of sap, was older than he could bring himself to believe. He had known Chenavard. His chastity was positively ferocious, and he was forever denouncing the impurities of neo-paganism in a language of alarming obscenity. He loved talking. Monsieur Sariette was a ready listener, old Guinardon's favorite subject, with the Chapelle des Anges in St. Sulpice, in which the paintings were peeling off the walls, and which he was one day to restore, when, that is, it should please God. For such separation, the churches belong solely to God, and no one would undertake the responsibility of even the most urgent repairs. But old Guinardon demanded no salary. Michael is my patron saint, he said, and I have a special devotion for the holy angels. After they had their game of dominoes, Monsieur Sariette, very thin and small, and old Guinardon, sturdy as an oak, hirsute as a lion, and tall as a Saint Christopher, went off chatting away side by side across the place St. Sulpice, heedless of whether the night were fine or stormy. Monsieur Sariette always went straight home, much to the regret of the painter, who was a gossip and a night bird. The following day, as the clock struck 7, Monsieur Sariette would take up his place in the library and resume his cataloging. As he sat at his desk, however, he would dart a Medusa-like look at anyone who entered, fearing lest he should prove to be a book borrower. It was not merely the magistrates, politicians, and prelates, whom he would have liked to turn to stone when they came to ask for the loan of a book with an air of authority, bred of their familiarity with the master of the house. He would have done as much to Monsieur Gaetan, the library's benefactor, when he wanted some gay or scandalous old volume wherewith to beguile a wet day in the country. He would have meted out similar treatment to Madame Renée Esparville when she came to look for a book to read to her sick poor in hospital, and even to Monsieur Renée d'Esparville himself, who generally contented himself with a civil code and a volume of the laws. The borrowing of the smallest book seemed like dragging his heart out. To refuse a volume even to such as had the most incontestable right to it. Monsieur Sariette would invent countless far-fetched or clumsy fibs, and did not even shrink from slandering himself as curator or from casting doubts on his own diligence by saying that such and such a book was mislaid or lost, when a moment ago he had been gloating over the very volume or pressing it to his bosom, and when ultimately forced to part with the volume, he would take it back a score of times from the borrower before he finally relinquished it. He was always in agony lest one of the objects confided to his care should escape him. As the guardian of 360,000 volumes, he had 360,000 reasons for alarm. Sometimes he woke at night, bathed in sweat, and uttering a cry of fear because he had dreamed that he had seen a gap on one of the shelves of his bookcases. It seemed to him a monstrous, unheard of, and most grievous thing that a volume should leave its habitat. This noble rapacity exasperated Monsieur René d'Esprevu, who, failing to understand the good qualities of his paragon of a librarian, called him an old maniac. Monsieur Sariette knew not of this injustice, but he would have braved the cruelest misfortune and endured opprobrium and insult to safeguard the integrity of his trust. Thanks to his assiduity, his vigilance and zeal, or in a word, to his love, Esprevine Library had not lost so much as a single leaflet under his supervision during the 16 years which had now rolled by, this 9th of September, 1912. Well, there's always a balance when it comes to that sort of thing. Are you increasing use or decreasing use? Is stuff going to be a loss to information? Yeah. Well, I mean, from the information. Now, in the first chapter, we saw, okay, who's going to rebel against church and state? Well, there's the people who are going to be the criminals, and like, well, is it worth dying for, or going through whatever else the government's going to put you through, or leave it up to the guards and the prisoners what you're going to go through? Or do you look into law, into the pursuit of knowledge, and use that towards one's own ends? Just like those people that were part of government and church, like they really believed in it when it was really, a mode in itself. And honestly, religion, yeah, there it should be per se, for the love of God, not for the love of, well, for love of, what religion it is, or